Utah's legislative session is underway, and there are already several bills touching on religious freedom, judicial reform, and federalism. So, what impact will these bills have on the state?
We can accomplish all the critical things that higher education is intended to provide without harming anyone or excluding anyone.
This week, I sit down with Sutherland's Constitutional Law and Religious Freedom Fellow, Bill Duncan, to give you a preview of some of the legislative debates we'll see this session. This is Defending Ideas. Defending Ideas is a weekly podcast produced by Sutherland Institute. On this show, we are committed to renewing the principles of common sense conservatism, making you a better champion of sound ideas. Welcome back to another episode of Defending Ideas. I'm your host, Nic Dunn, and it's that time of year where a lot of states are jumping into their legislative sessions, and that's true of us here in Utah. So just like we did last week, this week we're going to do another legislative preview for some of the issues that might come up this session here in Utah. To have this discussion, I'm excited to welcome back into the studio Bill Duncan, our Religious Freedom and Constitutional Law Fellow here at Sutherland. Bill, welcome back.
Thanks, Nick.
Bill, so we had this conversation with Christine Cook Fairbanks, our Education Policy Fellow, last week, and I want to have the same conversation with you because there are a few things kind of coming down the pipeline in terms of religious freedom, faith, and public life. There's a lot of debates in Utah right now over judicial reform and some things we've talked about on the show previously, and with some things happening at the federal level that are impacting state budgets. So there's kind of a renewed discussion right now around federalism and the role of states. So a lot to cover. Maybe where we can start, you just kind of give us an overview when it comes to things like religious freedom and the role of faith in public life. What are you watching that the legislature is going to be working on this session?
Yeah. The legislature over the last couple of years has been particularly sensitive to religious freedom areas. I think recognizing that there are a lot of conflicts at the national level, I think they've tried to create a setting in Utah where people of faith don't have to sue to get to have their rights respected, but that the legislature can be responsive to them beforehand and prevent a lot of those kinds of problems. So we're seeing in this session a similar approach. A couple of bills that are interesting. There's an important resolution that kind of just expresses the sense of what's happening or the importance of religion for society and religious freedom generally. One bill I think I'm particularly interested in that Sutherland is watching carefully is a bill that has to do with the context of higher education. And the specific scenario, if this is helpful, is a student is asked to write a letter to the legislature as a school assignment, which that sounds like a good school assignment. Only in this case, the student was asked to write a letter on a particular topic, taking a position that she didn't agree with because of her faith. And although everybody I tell that story to is usually startled, but since the bill has become public, it's that we've heard a number of other stories where that kind of thing is happening. And it could be posting on social media, it could be posting or publishing an article, writing a letter to the editor, but where a student is asked to do something against their religious freedom or their conscience, it doesn't have to be purely religious belief. And so this bill aims to try and pull back on that, prevent that from happening, requiring schools where it doesn't destroy the, if you can't change the class necessarily, but within the parameters of what needs to be taught in that class, if we can accommodate students' religious beliefs and their conscience, we're trying to do that. And so that's what this bill would do.
So that was a real case, right? Where
right.
The student was asked to write this letter to the legislature. Help me understand kind of the limiting principle of that, because I would think if I were a student or if I were a professor and I said, hey, I want to teach these kids the art of debate, and kind of one of those old cliches that the best way to learn an issue and to learn debating is take the other side.
Absolutely.
And so I guess what's the difference between in a class saying, okay, I want you to write for a different side that you disagree with, versus where does it cross the
Yeah,
bounds
that's
into, okay,
perfect.
now it's violating an actual religious freedom principle versus it's just an academic exercise?
Right. Well, that's such a great question, and that's what we're trying to do. And as we look at this bill and try and suggest what it should look like, there's sort of three things that we think separate that very appropriate, in fact, really good assignment. Right. See the other side and see their perspective. One is public. Requiring someone to communicate, so public communication that involves the reputation of the student. So it's one thing to say write a piece or write a letter as if you were, and then you turn that into the teacher, and the teacher says, "Yeah, you definitely understand the other side. Great job, totally perfect. Appropriate assignment." Sending a letter to the President of the United States. There was a case on this saying, you're a warmonger, and I think the Iraq War is wrong, or that kind of thing. You now are on the record as taking a position that's against your beliefs, and that's the specific concern. So I think it wouldn't require a major change in the way that professors are carrying on their teaching. But it's a necessary change, because it's not fair to a student to sort of then be on the record as with a public post or letter or something that it's sort of aligns them with a position they just don't agree with. That affects their reputation. And on some of these issues, which are very controversial, of course, it potentially affects future employment and all kinds of other things. So we think that this is probably pretty broad support for that, but exactly under the circumstances of if they're being asked to communicate public something that will affect their reputation.
Bill, it makes me think, I can't remember if we've ever mentioned it on the show, but there was a paper I came across a few years ago. It was during the Biden administration, when there was a lot of debate about sort of mass student loan forgiveness that the Biden administration was engaging in. I think they were citing authority under the HEROES Act from 2003, and there was a big Supreme Court case about it, basically saying that the administration, as I recall, probably didn't have authority to do that. But the reason I mention that is when that was being debated, I remember coming across a paper from the Texas Public Policy Foundation that was one of the best I had read on that topic, because the paper basically says, okay, we don't think that the president has constitutional authority to do this kind of student loan forgiveness. We don't think student loan forgiveness is a good idea in terms of policy substance. But first, we're going to steel man the argument for you. We're going to give a true steel man argument, which means here is the best argument for the other side,
right.
Just so you understand it. And then we're going to tell you why we think it's wrong. And it was so refreshing. I loved reading this paper. So I think in terms of when we're discussing and debating issues publicly, there really is a valuable skill set in being able to, okay, I'm going to steel man the other side. But to your point, maybe the distinction has to be, it's one thing to train and ask students to say, I want you to know how to argue the other side. I want you to have the skill set to steel man it and give proper respect to arguments that you may disagree with. But that's different than saying, I want you to agree with that position yourself, and sort of stake public territory on it. That seems like
I think that's right. And from a student's perspective, I think one of the things that's really valuable is you're more likely to be able to learn that skill if you're not sort of internally thinking, oh my gosh, what is, I don't agree with this position. I feel uncomfortable about it. You're going to hold back a little bit, maybe just parrot what you think the teacher wants to hear, rather than actually learning where you feel secure that I don't have to sort of abandon my personal beliefs in order to do well on an assignment. I think the student's more engaged. It sort of prevents a kind of adversarial relationship between the teacher and the student, where the teacher's saying, you have to adopt my position, and the student's saying, I maybe I just need to drop this class, which we don't want to have. It only applies in classes, I should say, this particular bill would only apply to classes that are required. So if you take a class on, a particular topic there where a specific point of view is kind of essential to the class, that would be a limitation. You could be expected to accept a certain viewpoint in some classes, but for classes that are required for graduation or to get your major, this would apply there. And I think it's a good, modest but appropriate for those specific circumstances.
Would the bill essentially say, and I don't know if there's details in there yet, but would the bill say that, okay, there has to be a distinction between this is an academic assignment versus this is staking out a public position. Does the bill
Yes,
kind of draw
yeah,
that line?
Yeah, it does. Or at least we're working on making some changes to make that more clear. But yeah, it will do that. And I think everyone, it's sort of all positions will be really comfortable with that portion of the bill for sure. So.
And we're talking about this in the context of religious freedom, but is it fair to say that this is sort of a broad conscience protection, not just a religious issue?
Yeah, that's a great distinction. It is, and there's two reasons why that's important. One is sort of how do I say this? Almost strategic, right? It's good to protect more people and get them sort of to recognize how they're benefited by allowing others to act on their beliefs. But the principled position is that that's what the Utah Constitution says. It says that the right of conscience has to be protected, and we think that's right. I mean, there's things that are really, really important for people that guide their life and shape the decisions they make. They may explicitly be religious, and of course that's critical. We must protect people of faith and religious organizations. But I think a wise approach is to ensure that everybody, whatever is an important guiding principle in their life, is allowed to live consistent with that. Absent harm that it might do to others. And I think it's wise that Utah has done this on quite a few bills lately. I think it's a good trend.
Bill, one question before we go to a break, and then when we come back, I want to get into some of the judicial reform debates happening in the legislature right now, and in the state generally. But on this issue, before we leave it, why is this a big deal? Like, why should we care about this? I mean, I think in terms of, we've had a lot of debates as a state and nation lately about the role of our universities, and of course, there's debates about, well, they're some say they're just indoctrination factories, and others say, well, are they really that correlated with economic success? There's still good data that a college degree can have really good returns, but I mean, help put it into context for kind of maybe the broader cultural debates people are hearing about colleges. Why is this reform something that, assuming you think it's a good thing, why is it a positive step for sort of the institution of higher education in Utah?
Yeah, that's a great thought. I believe that in Utah certainly, and I suspect in other places too, the conflicts the high profile conflicts we see are not the norm. They're probably the exception. But the more we pay attention to those exceptional circumstances where teachers denigrating a student for their beliefs, or there's attacks on teachers for just trying to help people to think about different points of view, those kinds of things, they're well known. They're certainly troubling, but it creates a perception that, gosh, school might not be welcoming for some people. School might not be, or sort of formal higher education might not work because I want to pursue this field. It's of interest to me, but I'm afraid I'm going to be asked to do something that I just can't do, and so maybe I'm going to select out. And we want to remove that concern. Everyone can be accommodated based on their faith, based on their conscience in. Reasonably in programs, and so we want to remove the conflict part of that and just allow the normal learning process to take place, which I think most people want that result. And I think if Utah specifically becomes a place where the school system is carefully avoiding those kinds of conflicts, appropriately accommodating where they can, and only refusing when they really need to, then it will have the effect of influencing, I think, other states to say, yeah, we can accomplish all the critical things that higher education is intended to provide without harming anyone or excluding anyone.
That's great. Well, before we go to break, any other bills you're watching that folks ought to be aware of on the kind of the religious freedom, faith, conscience space?
There are some other interesting bills. There's an interesting report by an organization that the report is called Religious Liberty in the States, and it's a scorecard. And Utah comes in 9th out of 50, of course. There are a couple of areas where Utah, sort of surprisingly, has missed a couple of things that could be better protections of people in the healthcare context, so they're not asked to do something contrary to their beliefs, or just ensuring that someone can't be denied insurance or something like that because of health-related, religion-related reasons. And I believe there will be some bills coming out in the next little while that will try and address some of those holes, and that would be very welcome as well.
Well, great, Bill. So when we come back, we need to take a quick break, but I want to get into some of the debates over the judiciary, the courts. Here in Utah, we've talked in the past, there's been quite a robust debate here in Utah about the role of the legislature versus the courts. It touches on redistricting, and so a lot of interesting stuff happening there we'll get into right after this break. Again, we're talking with Bill Duncan. This is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sutherland Institute is an independent, nonprofit public policy think tank based in Salt Lake City, Utah. Our mission is to defend the principles of the American founding and strengthen the institutions of civil society essential for those principles to endure. Sutherland provides research, events, and multimedia to policymakers and the public to promote the principles of faith, family, freedom, opportunity, and responsibility. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. I'm Nic Dunn. We're going to continue our conversation with Bill Duncan about some of the legislative debates we'll see in the upcoming session that just started recently. I want to remind you, if you like what you're hearing today, please visit defendingideas.org, where you can access this and previous episodes, and also make sure to subscribe to Defending Ideas wherever you get your shows. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Just search for Defending Ideas on your favorite platform and click subscribe. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the bell icon on your screen so you get a notification each time a new episode drops, which is every Tuesday morning. Again, all of that and more wherever you get your shows or at defendingideas.org. Bill, one of the other big debates I think that we're going to see is over judicial reform and discussions about what is the proper role and structure of things like the court system here in Utah versus the legislature. We've talked in the past about some of the debates over redistricting and who gets to make those decisions. So this is all kind of happening in that context. And some high-profile proposals this session that I think we'll see that might have an impact on the judicial system here in Utah. And maybe I want to ask you, the reforms you're seeing from the legislature, one, if you can kind of give us an overview of what to expect, and then two, is this really sort of proper checks and balances and accountability, or is it political overreach? Like, help us understand what's going on and put it into context.
Yeah, I love that framing because I think that's exactly the right question. And so let me try and I think what's happening is it's really two things happening at the same time. One is just the normal constitutional process. The courts will occasionly need more resources. They we're a growing state, and our proportion of judges per citizens, for instance, it's an interesting. I really hadn't thought of that till recently, and noted someone had made note of that. You've got to. People need quick trials. They need quick decisions on cases. There needs clarity. So, the legislature under the Constitution is responsible to ensure that happens. And then within those parameters set by the legislature, the judiciary can do its work. And I think for the most part, they really do a great job. It's like many things in Utah. I think people are really conscientious in trying to do things the right way. Having said that, there are some high-profile decisions, particularly at the Utah Supreme Court, and that's bled down, I think, into some of the lower court decisions as well on high-profile issues where the specific concern, which I share, is that sometimes the judges have a sense that their role is not so much to apply existing law, but to try and sort of insert some principles, maybe what I might call policy considerations, into the decision. Now, and that's unfortunate in a way. Well, it's unfortunate inherently because that's not the role of the courts in our system, but it also has created a problem that when the legislature is trying to address the first set of questions, how make sure the courts function to the best of their ability and perform their role in our system, it can look to outsiders like, oh, wait, they're trying to sort of punish the courts for doing these things. And of course, that can be part of the motive of what's going on. And so the way you framed it is right, because we need to ensure that whatever we're doing doesn't create problems in the future where we limit courts' ability to act independently and do the job that they need to do, but at the same time, promote or strengthen the ability of courts to make the hard decisions when maybe it goes against what they think is a good policy result, but it's what's required by the Constitution or by laws that are created by the people's representatives. So, and maybe you'll have some questions about specific ideas, but I think that's a good way to determine: is this fixing something that needs fixed, or is this something that where maybe it looks like there's an attempt to try and strong arm maybe the courts in a certain direction.
Well, one of the things that's coming in for debate for this session is the size of the state Supreme Court. Is it SB 134, or is that a different piece of legislation?
I think that's right.
Okay. But just for reference for our audience, that if you haven't heard, SB and HB and then a number, that's kind of the bill naming in the session. SB is Senate bill, HB is House bill. So, for the next couple months, we're going to hear SB so-and-so, HB so-and-so, and just to help our audience be able to know, you can search for that at the legislative website, le.utah.gov. It's a very easy and accessible legislative website. I think it's actually won some awards. So
I agree. It's
follow along with us if you can, and help us, make sure we get the bill numbers right, because there's a lot this session. Yeah. So, but talk to us about the legislative proposal to change the size of the court.
Right. Yeah, and you're right. It is Senate Bill 134, and so this one is would change the nature of the appellate court. So in Utah we have three court systems. We have the district court. That's usually what people think of when they think of a court. It's a judge and potentially a jury, and someone's they're in front of them and they hear evidence. But of course we have two other levels. The Court of Appeals that if someone doesn't like the decision made at the trial court level, they can appeal and try and convince another set of judges, and they meet in panels of three. So the three judges assigned to each appeal, and they can decide, did the trial court handle the law appropriately. Then the Utah Supreme Court, which has the responsibility only for kind of really high profile kinds of cases that typically raise really important issues that need some clarification. And currently, we have 5 members of the Utah Supreme Court. It's a low number. It's not unheard of. Some other states have that, but it's a little bit low given the proportion of judges to size of the state, and of course the number of cases that have risen. That's been that number 5 has been in place for I believe about 100 years. The number of judges on the Court of Appeals is 7, and that's been in place since 1987. So in their most recent report, the Judicial Council, I believe, is the organization that sort of looks at what needs to happen in the judiciary to be effective, encouraged an increase in the number of appeals court justices, but not Supreme Court justices. And so the Senate Bill 134 would do both, though. It would allow increase by 2 the number of appeals court judges, and then increase by 2 the number of Supreme Court judges. And I think there are there's some reasons why those would be good. One is that the growth is not going to slow down, probably in the state of Utah. Obviously, we need to fix some other things like housing and availability and stuff to make that more welcoming. But Utah's a growing state. It's a complex state. There's a lot of important things happening, and so as a result, we're likely to need that as things to have more judges who can handle these decisions. And because the Utah Supreme Court's decisions are so important, we need to make sure that they happen quickly and timely. And the sponsors of this bill believe that it would be appropriate to give a few more judges to handle the writing responsibilities, to get some of the cases that have lasted for some time. So again, because of the controversy that's gone on, I think someone might say, well, this looks a lot like court packing. They're trying to get judges that they want on the court. I'm sure that once this decision of the numbers is settled, it is absolutely appropriate to turn to the question of now, how should judges, what is their role, how should they approach dealing with things like the state constitution? Do they have the ability to sort of read principles in that are not in the text? Of course, I want to say no, of course, but I mean, those will be important questions. But for now, we're just looking at the question of, is there a way to potentially allow the court to work a little more effectively, and this seems to be an appropriate way to address that question.
Bill, maybe very briefly before we go to break, kind of one follow-up to that, and you mentioned that some critics might say, "Oh, this kind of looks like court packing." Obviously, if there's an underlying substantive need for more justices, that would, I guess, kind of be the counter argument. But so I guess kind of put it in context for us that if should these two issues kind of be kept separate, I guess is the question, is the size of our judicial system needs to keep pace with population versus if there, which we've seen, a disagreement between the two branches, the legislature and the judicial, on some of these other issues we've talked about in the past. What is the proper and appropriate and constitutional remedy if the elected body, the legislature, feels like the court has ruled incorrectly? And how does that align with or diverge from what we're talking about over here as far as the size of the justices?
Yeah, I think it aligns. I think while to a great degree there needs to be some separation, and the Utah Constitution, for instance, says you can't just pull a judge off the bench because you don't like their rulings, right? You can't make changes to the court that knock out a sitting judge. There's other ways that can be provided for if the judge does something that's wrong, or if the people lose trust in that person, they can vote not to retain them. So we do need to keep some separation. That's appropriate and consistent with our Constitution. But it is appropriate to wonder whether or not perhaps if there were a sort of the ability of more justices to consider the wide-ranging and large number of cases they're dealing with, maybe some of the concerns that we've seen might begin to dissipate a little bit. Maybe they have more time to not just rely on the litigants and the arguments they're making about what's a good law or what's a bad law, but to be able to spend more time researching and figuring out, well, what does the Utah Constitution mean? What does it meant? And it's when it was ratified, and I think those kinds of questions could justify bringing more justices onto the court.
Well, we need to take another break. In our last segment, I want to get into some things that have happened at the federal level, how that affects state government governance, and kind of tie up this discussion with a healthy discussion about federalism that we've talked about before. There's a lot of work going on that front as well. So again, this is Defending Ideas. We're talking with Bill Duncan. We'll be right back. Stick around.
For a deeper dive into the issues you care about, read Sutherland Institute's official blog, Insights and Takeaways. You'll gain deep insights from policy experts and relevant takeaways voters need to know. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. I'm Nic Dunn. We're going to jump back into our conversation with Bill Duncan, but want to remind you to subscribe to Defending Ideas. Just search for us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get your shows, and click subscribe, or find us at defendingideas.org. Bill, to round out the conversation, we talked a little bit before recording about this idea of federalism and how it's really having a practical impact on the debate and discussion at the state level, especially because the one big beautiful bill, the budget bill that was passed last year, can you tell us briefly what happened in the federal bill that is now sort of maybe forcing some of these federalism, state governance discussions here in Utah?
Yeah, great question. There are actually a number of things, but the one that I think is most relevant now, one of the things we hear from a lot of legislators, and we're going to see publicly, is the discussion about we've got to cut a lot of programs. We just have to sort of rein in the expenses the state takes on. We don't always know that one of the reasons that's true is that the state has had to take on more financial obligations to provide programs for its citizens that used to be paid for by the federal government. So the process is often that the federal government comes up with a good idea or a bad idea. They come up with an idea. They say the state, we ought to do this. We're gonna sort of budget a lot of money for this to happen. That often appropriately is actually carried out by the states, because the states really ought to be at the center of these policies. But then, as the federal government realizes, wow, we're not solvent. We're not even close to being solvent. We don't even, we can't even see solvent in the rearview mirror. So we've got to pull back. Then that leaves the states with the decision of, well, do we not offer things that maybe are important to the people of our state, or do we have to somehow increase our own financial reserves so that we can take care of these things? And of course, both things will have to happen. So the federal government decisions in this case have put many states in a challenging position where they are still feeling, for many reasons, that they need to continue to provide services, but the federal government is not giving the support they used to that. So these hard decisions are important, but it's more important to think about this for the long term. And I think that's where I hope that the legislature will go this session, and to figure out, how do we avoid this dependency on the federal government initially, so that each time some new idea comes along or a new administration says, well, let's do this and do that, the state doesn't either get caught short and then have to start cutting, or doesn't jump on this new bandwagon and take all this money and then find out later there are all kinds of strings attached that are uncomfortable.
Bill, is it safe to say that we should want and expect our state, and this is probably true at any state level throughout the country, let's be less reliant on Washington, D.C. in whatever ways we can, so that we are less susceptible to the instability that is sort of inherent in Washington, D.C. right now? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's a great way of saying, but better than I said it. And you've written about this and made some important points. It's not only just financial. It's not just a matter, but it's that many of the better ideas come, and ideas that are sensitive to the specific context of a state come. So financial dependence is not only a problem just for dollars and cents reasons, but it also obscures the good that states can do in areas, like welfare reform, education, et cetera, all of these kinds of things, and our need to finance those kinds of important initiatives can blind us to what actually are good initiatives or not. And so both, I think both has a policy and a financial dimension.
Bill, I want to ask you about two bills in particular. And again, check me on the bill numbers, and our folks out there can go look these up and make sure we're getting these bill numbers right. But HB 249 and SB 100. Tell us about those. Good bills, bad bills. What should the legislature do? Yeah,
both good, both really good. Let me say something briefly about House Bill 249, and then I'll come back to Senate Bill 100. Partially because it's easy to remember the 100. So our state has an excellent legislative body called the Federalism Commission, which has members of the House and Senate and some other members as well, who are kind of always watching this, making sure that the state is careful to meet its obligation and not and to respond to the risk that the federal government might overreach. And what they've adopted as a group, so this is a unanimous initiative of the commission, this bill that would require state agencies to kind of assess where they are in terms of dependence on federal dollars. It's forward-looking in that it encourages the state, and they would interact with some of our great higher education institutions to kind of come up with the analysis and figure out where are areas of vulnerability where the states may be a little too dependent on financial help from the federal government. That then again begins to bleed into questions of, well, what's the appropriate policy for the state of Utah rather than for the national government. Because those two can sometimes be at odds. So the bill is kind of would give us a really clear picture of where we're at, and then of course that then opens the next question: where do we need to go? And I think it's a very productive and forward-looking bill.
And so we've talked a lot about federal guidance before.
Yeah.
Remind our audience, what is that issue
Yeah.
as far as federal guidance letters, and what is the legislature trying to do about it?
Great question. Yeah, and that's what Senate Bill 100 deals with. So guidance letters are, so if you think about, we think of when a bill becomes a law, we think of Congress passing a law saying, the following things ought to happen. But unfortunately, we've kind of allowed a large body of regulations to develop that are not actually the law as we think of Congress passing it, but directions, rules that are established presumably to enforce the law by the executive branch agencies. And there's different opinions on that, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm on the bad side on that, or that's my position. That's not a good development. But there is an additional set which is even more troubling, and that is guidance. And so this is where an agency that's responsible to enforce a law passed by Congress communicates to state officials or businesses and tells them, our interpretation of the federal law is the following. It's not binding because it's not federal law, but it has the effect of incentivizing state officials and others to go along with the interpretation of an agency, which of course changes every couple of years whenever there's a change in administration. And can really upend and create significant burdens on the states. So Senate Bill 100 is a follow-up to a previous bill from last session in which the state legislature said we need to make those guidance letters transparent. People need to be able to know what they're being told to do by the federal government. So Senate Bill 100 does two things. First, it includes any guidance that's given to education officials, that's universities, schools, and Utah State education officials. And then it also asks the agencies, as they're making these guidance letters they receive from the federal government available so the public can see those and the legislature can see them, is also to give the legislature a sense of what the likely cost of compliance with that guidance is. So if the federal government says, the schools ought to, well, let's maybe take an example outside the school setting, that, in order to reduce emissions, we need to do the following with certain kind of engines you can use to work on your yard or whatever. We need to know, is the state going to have to hire a new official to implement that program? Is the state going to have to put aside some of its priorities in order to implement these federal priorities? Those costs are essential in determining whether or not the legislature is going to give guidance to the state agencies, whether to comply with that guidance or to push back. And when the state legislature has the opportunity to interact with federal legislators and members of Congress, to encourage them to push back too, and to say, no, this is, we're doing all we can to meet the needs of our people. And when we get this additional mandate from the federal government that's not even the law, that's asking too much of us. So it allows us to quantify. It's very similar in the effect as a forward-looking way to ensure that we understand exactly where we stand in terms of what the federal government is asking the states to do financially. And if we get this right, then I think the ability of the state to be more independent will be significantly enhanced.
I see it kind of like at the legislature, every bill has what's called a fiscal note. And so that says if it's going to cost the taxpayer money, this is how much it's going to cost for taxpayers. It's kind of like doing that with that federal guidance letters. If there's a cost, we're attaching that cost to it. So I kind of like it saying, first, let's just make all the letters transparent. Then let's make sure we know how much it would cost.
Right.
And that's the kind of information we need to make better decisions at the state level.
Yeah, I love that analogy, and that's exactly right. And hopefully it allows people who, we all have other things we've got to do and stuff. We watch the legislature and try and know what's happening, but I think sometimes we're sort of surprised by the decisions that are made and even annoyed. But if we understood better why that's happening and it could influence some of the decisions we try and make as responsible citizens to who we vote for and what we're asking our representatives to do. Maybe we need to say to members of Congress, hey, you've got to watch out for us. Our poor state can't handle these unfair burdens.
Well, Bill, we're at time. We'll leave it there. We'll come back and discuss as these issues progress during the legislative session. We got 45 days. We're a number of days into it now already, so it's going to go fast, and a lot of fun debates to be had over the next month and a half or so. So, again, thanks for being with us and sharing your expertise.
Thanks for giving me time to talk about it.
Well, we're going to take one final break before we leave you with final talking points. This is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sometimes it's hard to keep up with the latest policy debate that affects your life. The solution? Subscribe to Sutherland Institute's weekly newsletter, where you'll find in-depth insights from seasoned policy experts, compelling multimedia, and advance notice of special events. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back. The main thought I want to share today is that the legislation we heard about from Bill, I think, touches on three foundational principles of our constitutional republic. First, this idea that faith and the right of conscience actually has a positive role in public life, and we always need to ensure that our laws and policies protect those rights. Second, that the separation of powers between the branches, in this case, the legislative and the judicial, when coupled with appropriate and constitutional checks and balances, is essential to our system of governance. And third, that embracing more federalism, meaning states taking a bigger role owning and leading on policy issues, should be viewed as an antidote to a lot of the political instability we see on the national level. I think this is a good example of where specific issue debates tied to these specific pieces of legislation actually relate directly to core constitutional and civic principles that we discuss so often on this show. That connection is worth remembering because you and I are going to hear a lot about and we're going to discuss these issues in the coming months. Well, that's it for this episode of Defending Ideas. If you enjoyed this discussion, please visit defendingideas.org, where you can access previous episodes and watch or listen on your favorite platform. Don't forget to subscribe to Defending Ideas on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you like to get your shows. And please share this episode with a friend, family member, or coworker who may find it valuable. And lastly, if you want to support the broad work of Sutherland Institute, if you want more conversations like this, please make a contribution at sutherlandinstitute.org/donate. Thanks again for joining us on Defending Ideas from the Sutherland Institute in Salt Lake City. I'm Nic Dunn. We'll see you next time.